Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, Where God is at Work, a podcast where cross-cultural workers discuss everything from faith and fear to finances and faux pas. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauly, a missions leader serving in Rome, and I'm here with Jenn Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And today, we don't have Alessandro with us, but we have Doug Irwin, our friend and church planter and pastor in Paris. Welcome, Doug. Doug, why don't we, before we get into our first question stuff, just let the audience know a little bit about who you are, what your background is, where you're from, and your family.
Yes. So I am planting a church. We started in January of 2023 with a French pastor, my co-pastor Nathan. My family and I have been serving in France since 2017. We're a little bit later to get into the field than most families. So we moved over right after I had turned 40, and my wife was around the same age as well. So we had older kids coming over here. My son Graham is 19, and he's back in the States at university. And my daughter Maeve just finished her junior year of French high school and is actually we're going to Paris to take the ACT on Friday. So we're getting ready looking towards university for next year.
Wow. So what was your career before coming to France?
I was typically bivocational, often working with church plants. I was at UPS for a long time before coming to the field. Both my wife, Emily, who has a big art ministry here in Paris, and I were always serving in the church and wanting to church plant. And we never thought that would happen in France, but God used other missionaries and a very loving sending church in St. Louis, Missouri, where we're both from, to encourage us and to see what was possible. And they, to hear enough missionaries coming through that we felt uniquely burdened to come and care for the French the way that God was calling us to. So,
oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. I know, Doug, you have listened to some of our podcasts before, and also we should give a shout out to your wife. She helped us create our logo. So shout out to Emily for doing that. But we like to get started with kind of a question that kind of is general, but then brings us into our topic for today. And so I guess the question we're going to start off with is, what types of expectations did you have when arriving to the field that quickly got dashed or canceled or changed? I think we all probably have some fun stories about that.
It's sort of embarrassing to say these things out loud, isn't it? I don't know about you guys. It's sort of embarrassing for me. I think I expected my French brothers and sisters to sort of be happy to have me. I'm not saying they're not, but sort of like, oh, yay, missionaries are coming to help. And I quickly realized that whether it be because of past experiences with missionaries that weren't positive or genuine prejudices that exist, which we all have, or whatever, that there were a lot of walls and barriers, even with the best and well-meaning Christian ministers and workers in France. And it took a long time to navigate that and to figure out what was going on there and to understand what is my role and how do I fit into the bigger picture of what God is doing here. And so, for example, my mission organization sort of sent me with, you and your husband will go plant a church north of Paris area. And when we got here, we realized we have never planted a church, much less a French church. And so we don't know what we're doing. And then there were just all sorts of issues, and God worked those out. But it was interesting, to even what my own mission agency was expecting or launching us to do didn't actually seem to fit with what the French were wanting to receive me to do.
Wow, that's interesting. I think we could probably have a podcast all about that, because it feels like there's a lot underneath that. Yeah, for us, I would say, so I grew up in Italy before coming to serve as a missionary. And so I think the expectations I had was for Rome to be like Udine, where I grew up. And the reality is, anyone who's traveled throughout Italy, it changes quite a bit from region to region, and then even more when you go north to south. And so Udine is like in the far north, Rome is central. And so there's a big change there. But then also in the evangelical world, there's a change. So like the city I grew up in, there were 2 evangelical churches that I knew of at that time, one that I was going to and one other one. Come to Rome, and it's the capital city. There's multiple evangelical churches. And so I guess the expectation I had was to come and there to not be very many evangelical churches, and then realizing like, wow, there are, and there's a lot of messiness with that. And so navigating and realizing like, I think the need for collaboration, learning what's God already doing here, all the stuff that we've been talking about in this podcast, actually, probably should have listened or read your dissertation, 6 years ago and had a better head start. But yeah.
Didn't quite exist 6 years ago, but 5 you could have.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was certainly connected to language learning. I think my mentality going in to coming to the field was like I was going to develop like a Google Translate capacity, right? Like if I just knew the French word for the English thought that I'm having, I would be able to communicate clearly. And so I had kind of this minimalistic view of the language side, and I just wanted to get as done quickly as possible with language school, and that was not the case. COVID hit, and that actually for me ended up being a blessing, because now I could do extra language calls throughout the week, and really jumped up in my ability there. So I think my idea was, my mission agency even said, it'll probably take you 9 to 12 months. Well, it took me 4 years, and I still work on things. And so that was an expectation that was just wrong in my mind. But then it also just had to be like, I had to grow in my desire and my love for people, to where I would see the value and the cultural insight that was speaking French.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I want to pause real quick on that, because there's something very interesting. You said it took you 4 years to get a grasp of the language, that you like a more comfortable grasp of the language. Is that how you would say it?
Yeah. I mean, I was wanting to preach and teach, so I knew that I needed to go deeper into B2, C1 level.
Yeah.
In working. So, it also, I started learning French at 41. So, there's that side as well.
No, I just appreciate you saying that, because I know so many people that struggle with language learning, and they beat themselves up over it. And so to hear, you persevered through all of that and continued, that's really encouraging.
I think a realistic expectation.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of key to even the discussion we want to have today, plays into this idea of language learning, but just in general, what it looks like to arrive, because we want to look at this step to going overseas. The move abroad has its own challenges, and we can get as prepared as we want ahead of time. So, I mean, I know for myself and the missionaries that I lead, we've all gone through a pre-field training. There's a great training center in North Carolina that does it. There's others in other parts of the world. And this isn't to knock them, but really until you get over to the field that you're going to, you really can't. You can be really prepared in a lot of ways, but you actually learn stuff and start realizing what you're facing when you get there.
Yeah.
And so there's different bumps and struggles along the way, but part of that is thinking through, okay, what, you mentioned, Doug, UPS, and I'm sure you had skills and things that you brought to UPS, but then when you got to UPS, there was some sort of on the ground training, on the clock training, that you went through. And so Jenn, you worked with French partners to create a type of on the job training or on the field training called Elan, right?
I did. Elan is sort of the outgrowth. It is definitely the outgrowth of my doctoral research. And it's also sort of the culmination of the positive experiences that I had on field and the academic research that I did to kind of understand my own experience and the experience of other missionaries. So after having realized that we had no idea how to plant a church, much less a church in France, we ended up going to a church planting training center with a French partner that was well connected and respected within the French networks. And this French partner was really eager to help David and I find our way and find our place, which was a huge gift to us. And he was interested, yes, in pushing me to keep getting the language down, to going, as far as I could in language and being able to express myself, to really grasping the culture and everything that had to do with that, as well as learning about me and my gifts and where if God sent us here, where is the best place for us to make that contribution? And that was such a gift to me, because I realized after working with this person and finding sort of my niche and the places where I could make valuable contributions within that sort of first 4-year window that Doug was talking about, while I'm still learning language, while I'm still learning culture, really finding my footing and getting some momentum, and watching and observing other colleagues who had been on the field even longer than I had, that still didn't quite have the stride or the platform or the reach that was being made available to me. And I realized it was because I had a French person opening those doors and making that way for me. And so I started to sort of back engineer that and ask, what would it look like if arriving missionaries had a French partner that was looking for ways to help them find their place in France and get connected and learn the culture and the language, sure, but also really identify the places where their gifts and their passion met a need here in France. And so to do that, I did a one-day learning community where I invited 6 French partners and 6 non-French partners to a full day. I said, I'm going to buy you lunch if you'll give me a whole day of your time. And we had a very candid day-long conversation of what happens when missionaries arrive in France, what's working well, what needs to work differently on both sides. And at the end of the day, really came to the conclusion that the posture with which a foreigner arrives, are we humble? Are we trying to figure out where God's already at work and how God is already at work here? So really talking about that arriving posture. But then my French brothers and sisters said, yeah, but we haven't been great at receiving. Since missionaries have kind of just shown up, planted their flag, and started doing their thing, we haven't been opening doors to them and inviting them in and saying, how can we help? But if missionaries arrived humbly with a posture of, we're here to serve, and what can we contribute and what would you like us to do, then we would definitely need to be learning how to be better hosts and opening doors and creating opportunities and building networks. So together in that day, we came up with sort of a 3-pronged process, meaning the first prong being spiritual formation. That attitude with which a missionary arrives needs to be really in the image of Christ. And that flows out of our identity in Christ and who we are in Christ. And the cross-cultural experience is very deconstructing in all of the healthy ways if we engage it well. So when we come abroad, we all of a sudden we can't speak. All the things that we were gifted at, we can't actually do those gifts because we don't have the language and cultural capacity to do them. And if we lean into that and ask Christ to shape us in that place, and to reform us in his image, that can really shape our attitude towards missions and our capacity to serve with humility and with grace, and also build our confidence in those skills, realizing, oh, this is about Christ living through me and his power shining through me, not about my own innate talents and skills necessarily. So that first piece was spiritual formation. We thought we really need missionaries that are really spiritually formed in that image of Christ. The second piece was this cultural adaptation piece. We need missionaries that understand the culture, and not just the French culture, but the French evangelical culture, the French Christian culture, what's going on in the church world in France. And to do that, we need these tour guides or mentors that are French that say, hey, if you're a church planter, you should really be at this conference, or you should have really read this book, or let me take you and introduce you to this person, or let me help you know what's happening in this denomination. So insiders coming alongside the outsiders as mentors became the second key component. And then the third one was this idea of ministry capacity. Once we are have a toolbox that helps us continually to be shaped by Christ. So spiritual formation is never finished, but if we have the right tools in our toolbox, then we're going to always engage it in right ways. Mentoring by a French partner it's never fully finished, but we can get to the place where we have something to offer and a way to participate and contribute. Then we need a coach to help us really flesh out a plan of action. Like, now here's the concrete steps that I'm going to take to engage in mission. So that became the basis for what eventually became Elan.
Very cool. So this all sounds really, really good, Jen. And I wonder if we need to have you like unplug your headphones or something while we go ahead and ask Doug how it really plays out, because Doug was part of the first of the cohorts that you guys had go through this. And so it would be really great, Doug. Just wanted to open the floor to you and hear kind of how was your experience? What was, some of the things that you really took away from that program?
Yeah, I think this was the first time that I was in a room with French people when I went to the first retreat. So year one, we had a retreat every year to meet. First year, our spiritual directors. Second year, to meet our mentors. Third year, to meet our coaches. And that retreat was kind of the first time I was in a room with French people saying, here's how we can receive you. Like, here are the kind of the cultural roadmap to walking humbly and partnering with us. And these were people who were generally excited. If you just showed up as a missionary in Paris and you went to a church and you said, hey, I'm a missionary, I think like Jen said, generally people be like, we've seen missionaries before, and maybe they've had good experiences, maybe they've had bad, but they're going to hold you at an arm's length just because culturally the French want you to come in through their processes. So the idea that I was going to land in Wild and Language School, then build a church planting team, and then immediately launch was just not realistic. But I was so grateful to hear some of the French people saying, hey, this is a longer road than you think, but it is a good road and we will help walk beside you. So the first year I was in a cohort of 4 people. We read a lot of great books, emotionally healthy spirituality. We read things, and we would just go onto this forum and kind of share our thoughts. And all the while, we're also meeting with spiritual directors every month to kind of go through and discern with others, the Holy Spirit, how God was moving in us. And it was my first introduction. I grew up, well, not a believer, but when I came to know Christ when I was 16, it was in very conservative circles, Reformed conservative circles. And so I had not really had touches with spiritual formation or a lot of these other practices that we were doing. So this was very much my first dive into some of these things. Some of the books we read had ideas that I didn't agree with, didn't find helpful. But even that served something, because then it was a chance to say, but do you all see this in France? Is this part of your cultural touchstones? Is this how you experience the Lord? And it was really, really helpful, even when it was something that you disagree with. Also, that's helped by just the French love of debate. And so getting on the cohort and having on our forum and typing away at something and then having them come back with counterpoints was very helpful. So that was kind of my experience the first year. The second year, I had a French mentor, and he was the president of one of the like denominational or like big overarching groups here in France. And he was incredible. I wish that my French had been better. As I mentioned, it took me a while. because I could have taken more advantage of that relationship with him at that time. But he gave me a lesson that was one of the things that I still think about today. He sent me 4 French songs as just like one of our weekly assignments. And he was like, Doug, these are like the Mount Rushmore of French music. Just listen to them all. I know that you're musical, analyze them and tell me what you think. And I came back and I didn't really know what he was looking for. I was like, here's what I think of the lyrics. Here's what I think of the melody. And like 3 of them were minor key songs. And I just kind of mentioned that in passing. And he was like, that's so great because these are the songs we sing. And it began to make me realize, oh my goodness, when we sing songs in our U.S. or North American church services, most of them are major key. Most of them are celebrative, or even our reflective songs are usually in major keys. But the French person is mostly identifying with a minor key. And he's like, we sing sad songs and we tell tragic stories. And that's why and I was like, that insight was a bomb for me, because I was like, oh my goodness, the gospel is in literature sense, it's a comedic story. It is a heroic, victorious story. And this is a people who tell tragedies. And so their own culture is kind of against the gospel. And so it helped me to say, boy, it's really important to approach humbly, even in sharing the gospel with others.
So I got to ask a question. Were the songs Christian songs, or were they just...
No, these were like, one was Emmenemoi by Aznavour. It was like a famous French folk singer. One was a Johnny Hallyday song. One was by Big Flo and Ali, and the other one was by Jean-Jacques Goldman, who is like it's kind of like an 80s pop star.
Okay.
80s and 90s. So they were kind of all over the decades as well.
Cool.
Year 3 is when I met my coach, and that was when I'm pushing more and more into ministry, able to do things, but the coaching relationship was so great. I still meet with my coach every month, and that relationship has been one of the most helpful because it's one where we talk about what blockages we've run into, and mostly they're relational, and we're able to talk about relational things. But he's also in France, and so he's also kind of a French cultural touchstone to say like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is the direction we're going. And we do a lot of discerning together as well. So we've kind of, like, my coach has kind of become all 3 years combined after Elan. So it's been really great.
When you started off, I was wondering, at what point in your journey to becoming a missionary did you realize that this would be part of your training, or what would happen when you got to the field? Like, did you know that before you ever launched to the field, or was this something that you found out later?
I was pretty naive about what was going to happen here when we got here. Jen and I had not. We actually met at down in the Alps for the first time, and she approached me as a new missionary, and she was like, "Hey, I have this new program I'm developing. I would love for you to participate." And that was my introduction, and it was so good and necessary for me because, landing with a later elementary age child and a junior high age child, I was very much the dad and the husband that is putting on my kids' oxygen masks in the plane first instead of putting on my own. Like, I was kind of in a mode of like, I'm just going to white knuckle it through all this difficult transition until and make sure that my family can get through this. But Elan says, actually, it's really important that you put on your oxygen mask and that you see these difficult things that you're going through. These are all part of it. I didn't realize the idols of my heart that I had to deal with. I had idols of self-reliance because I was capable in English in the U.S. And when I wasn't capable, when I was depending upon small children in the emergency room to help me translate things, it was very much eye-opening, but also it allowed me to fully kind of do that pilgrimage to the interior of who I was that I needed to do. And so that was perhaps if I could summarize the biggest takeaway for me with Elan was really, it says, hey, you're going to go through these difficult changes and it is going to be dramatic and you are going to be plunged into crises. But if you surround yourself with the right people and you have the right attitude about collaborating with the French, they are going to help get you through this. And not only that, but it's going to lead to we think is fruitfulness. And so that's what I was able to do with Elan.
Awesome. And that was 5 years ago, right? More or less.
So my first year was 2018. We started our first cohort. And so then, 2020 was right before the confinements here in France. I had our retreat with the French, with my coach. And as I said, I continue even 2024. I meet with him in a couple of weeks here.
So I'm assuming, similar to theater, they say like the first day, the first show, that performance is usually the roughest, and then you work out the tweaks and you get things sorted by the last day. It's usually one of the better performances. Jen, this is, he was part of the first. How has things changed and been tweaked now, or what's the experience like, 6 years later?
Yeah, it definitely needs constant tweaking and constant evaluation and feedback and all of that. So yeah, like Doug's the wonky pancake, right? The first pancake always comes out a little wonky. So yeah, we've learned a lot. One is that it's strange, but we all don't know what we don't know. And so this idea of even, first of all, needing this, it's a hard sell, actually. It takes actually a level of self-awareness and humility and even age to recognize the need for a program like this. So there are challenges. Do we adapt to what people think they need, or do we help people understand what they really need? And that's a challenge, right? Like, the weekly forums are difficult for people to stay committed to. In Elan, we read a lot of books, and each week you read a chapter, and then you're supposed to interact on a forum. And the cohorts where everybody participates, there's rich conversation, and that's really useful. And the cohorts where fewer people participate, then obviously the experience isn't as valuable for them. And that's not something we can manufacture from the program side. I can't manufacture interaction. That has to happen. So we're constantly trying to figure out what works. We've done some things like Doug's cohort was pretty much all asynchronous online forum engagements. Now we tend to do, last year for spiritual formation, they did bi-weekly calls, and it was just a 30-minute call over lunch every other week, but where the missionaries could get on, there'd be one of the spiritual directors would be there, and they'd be able to process some things. And I would say participation in that was around 50%, maybe. So it still wasn't 100%, but at least gave the option. So we've done some tweaking like that. Some cohorts have tried WhatsApp groups to stay in contact and to maintain that sort of level. We've done different things with the mentors. For Doug's cohort, there was, the mentors would give sort of weekly assignments, like the song thing that he did. Now we have in their budget where the mentor and the missionary are supposed to get together for a face-to-face time. That wouldn't have been possible during COVID. So we've tweaked it along the way, and I think we're still going to have to. And I think also what I'm learning is that there's got to be a training process on the front end. So some mission organizations get it right away. They see the need, they understand it. And I would say predominantly the ones who get it are the ones that actually have mission organizations in France. Like, I'll use the example of SIM. SIM sends U.S. missionaries, but SIM France exists, and SIM France receives those missionaries, but SIM France is also a sending organization. They are like 100% bought in to Elan and would love to see how this could work in other countries where they're sending missionaries, because as French people who see both sides of that, they recognize the value. Whereas a lot of North American sending agencies that are predominantly senders and haven't been in a receiving posture within their home country have a hard time recognizing how significant collaboration can be. I've even had one mission organization, which will remain nameless, say that they don't like Elan because of the level of collaboration, and they want to be the ones defining their missionaries' mission and posting, and the input of a French partner they feel could take them off of that mission or detract from it. So that's an extreme. But what I'm realizing is that we've got to do a little bit of education and promotion on the mission org side of things too.
I've been here for 5 years now, and I've been like, as I was listening to Doug explain it and you explain, I was like, wow, like, when are we going to have the Elan Italy so I can take part in it even now? Like, I'm like, this is it sounds like good stuff. And, I feel like different people have different ways of learning. Some people want to learn ahead of time. They kind of, won't even try anything until they've had a learning process. Some people have to fail a couple times and then realize, hey, I should go pick up that manual and read it and try and so I wonder if that's too part of it. Like, some missionaries need to go and kind of see like how tough it can be, and then realize, hey, it would be helpful to go take part in something like this, which can also be problematic too, though. Doug, you're a leader also within your organization and with of missionaries in France. Like, do you recommend Elan? Is it required? What's kind of what's your take on it?
It was interesting to hear Jen saying that she runs into pushback on something that is clearly helpful and clearly creates a great posture for our French hosts for collaboration. Because I have also run as a field leader, run into individual missionaries who push back for any number of reasons. But for us, perhaps it's just my own participation, but this has become essential and required training for missionaries arriving on the field. And not only that, but as missions agencies, and mine included, change in the length of stay or kind of these things, we're also then taking that into consideration, saying, okay, so maybe it's not a 3-year program, but we do want to get all 3 of these elements into someone, even if they're coming for 2 years or just 3, but they're going to have a shortened language learning, whatever that looks like. We believe so strongly in this that we've made it required training for missionaries coming to the field. And if there's some reason that they can't do it, we say, these are the kinds of things that we would do in this training. Can you provide with us a plan to get these from other places? And maybe they're going straight in. Maybe language isn't an issue for them, and they already speak the language. So we're willing to be flexible, but these are essential paths that we need our new missionaries to be coming and experiencing.
Well, you touched on something that's really interesting I hadn't thought about, but that idea of, I feel like missions it's obviously been changing for a while, but this idea of, I'm packing everything into my casket, I'm going, and I'm never coming back, versus, we live in an age where travel is cheaper and cheaper, the ability to go back and forth, and people are changing jobs and moving around so easy that, I could see the need for some model where it's like, hey, if you're here for a year, here's a 3-month program that you'll go through that's replicates and touches on. It's not going to be as in-depth and as good maybe as a 3-year program, but we want to, set you up for, for being able to digest these concepts and come with as close of a better posture as we can get. I've faced that too. We've had missionaries come in my reality so far, all of our missionaries have been relatively young. I would love to have, Doug, you talked about coming with teenagers and after a time of a previous career. I would love to have some people like that come to our field, because right now we're so young, and I feel like something like this would serve us well. We don't have anything currently. There's some of us that have been talking about trying to come up with something like this. And so, Jen, I would love to hear kind of, do you think this model is something that can can be taken to other countries, and what would that even look like? Like if another country in Europe or anywhere in the world wanted to develop something like this, how much of it is transferable? How much would need to be contextualized? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I definitely was thinking about this all of the way through my research. And where I say that this was sort of the confluence of my research with my experience is that my research showed that the three key components for missionary sustainability and fruitfulness for the long term were Christ-like character, cultural intelligence, and ministry capacity. So the 3 years of Elan line up with that. And I think those three components, like Doug was talking about, those three pathways are replicatable. You could talk about them in any context. Those should be the three things that we're figuring out how to build into our new missionaries. How are we building into them Christ-like character, cultural intelligence, and ministry capacity in the place where they're doing ministry? But because, again, the title of my dissertation is Missions With, right? It would still, this sort of thing should be reborn in every place with the input of national partners, with the, asking the national partners. For instance, year one of Elan is done in English because usually missionaries don't have the language capacity yet to read and write and express themselves in French. But the spiritual director who leads the entire program, she is French. And she chose the reading materials, and many of them exist in French. So as the missionary is meeting with French partners or leading Bible studies, if they want to replicate some of this stuff, it's replicatable for them from the get-go. And it means that the way that they're learning spiritual formation, the nuances of how we're interacting together in a group at the retreat, and down to how we're eating at a retreat, down to everything that we're doing, is heavily influenced by French perspectives and French ways of doing things, even if the language that it's done that first year is in English. So if I were to do this, and if I were to coach a team of how to develop something like this in another country, I would say you should start with a one-day learning community with national partners and bring them into the room. Ask them what are the Christ-like characteristics that are most important to them, what's essential to them in someone that they want to work with, what's valuable to them in terms of a contribution. I would do that sort of one-day learning community to have the voice of the national partner and perspective shaping the process from the get-go. I think that would be critical. But I think, that the basic ideas are replicatable. It would definitely benefit then from being culturally influenced by national partners.
I feel like I have a ton more questions for you, but we'll take those offline, because we have been thinking, there's a few of us mission leaders here in Rome, and a mixture of Italian and Americans really right now at this point. But we've been talking about this as a potential need to develop something. And I don't know if you face this in France or not, but here in Italy, it seems like every kind of grouping, maybe it's either a denomination or like a network or even just a mission, is trying to answer these questions to some degree. But they're all kind of doing it on their own. And this idea of, could we come together and do this? So that would be a question I had, Jen, is this something just for missionaries within your organization, or how is this being received, and how many different, I don't know if you can maybe not even name the organizations, but just say how many different organizations have been a part of sending people through Elan?
Yeah, we've had about 5 or 6 different mission organizations participate. And for me, it was critical that the tool be exterior to any one mission organization. And that's for several reasons. One, we really don't need to replicate the wheel. And it's not like we have thousands of missionaries coming every year into this country. There's so few already that we can do a much higher quality program if we make it a resource that's shared in common by several mission organizations. So the way that we make sure that collaboration is a piece of it is that when a mission organization wants to send a missionary through Elan, they pay 100 euros a year to be a part of Elan as an organization, and then they get a vote in our annual meeting. They get to send one representative to our annual meeting, and they get to hear about, the program, the developments, what's happening, and they get to give their input. So they're not just being beneficiaries of Elan by sending missionaries, they're being contributors to the program. And I think it's really critical that we hold that in common. It also, for missionaries, it gives them a space external to their direct reporting line and to their direct bosses and reports to process some of their struggles and some of their challenges and some of their trials. And I think it makes it a safe space. And then you also are putting missionaries who are sort of in the same phase of transition to the field and same phase of ministry development together to hear from and support and learn from one another, while taking the specifics of their mission organization a little bit out of the equation. So there's lots of benefits to externalizing that. Doug, I don't know if you have any experiences that speak to that, but
Oh, certainly that came through in year 3 to just be able to talk about, hey, this is what I'm walking through with my organization. Is this normal? How can I deal with these relationships or systems? And so that was certainly something that my coach and I worked through quite a bit. So it was helpful.
I have one final question, but before I ask that, Doug, is there anything else you would like to share about your experience with Elan? And
yeah, just to say that when you land in your new culture, your cross culture, the transition time is very crucial in your formation, and as painful and difficult as it is to admit for me in your 40s that you needed help from the French partners, so that this great paradox of I have come here to serve and to lead you, my French brothers and sisters, and yet I am going to be not necessarily a burden, but I'm going to need you on the early side. And to have Elan there to, like, as you're being stripped away of your capacity of these idols of self-reliance, to have someone walking alongside to help build back good things that point others to Christ, is so crucial. And I'm grateful for being able to walk alongside all of these brothers and sisters that I also just feel really connected through Elan to the French evangelical world. We're very small here in France. We're somewhere between 1% and 2% of the population, and yet I feel like I can reach out to most other believers or other pastors in France and even get them on a call. It's an incredible group of people that are planting churches and leading others to Christ here in France.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for your time, Doug, and for sharing that. And I think as we wrap up, there's one question that's been burning, I think, for all of our listeners. I know it's been burning for me. What's behind the name? Why was it named Elan?
Elan means momentum in French, but anyone who does crossword puzzles in English knows that it's a word that also means to do something with flair or with excellence. So I liked the bilingual connotations of the word. It also means moose in French, but we weren't really going for that. It just happens to be.
I always tell people it means moose.
Moose has momentum too, right?
No, but it means momentum. And just so you know, Jesse, we could share the Elan website in the show notes. There's English and French pages available for the Elan website. And if anybody listening would want to have a time of consultation to figure out what would this look like in their context or how could it be developed, I'd be really happy to set that up so they can just reach out and we can go further.
Yeah, would that include some of your French partners as part of that consultation potentially?
We could if they speak English. I mean, so not all of our French partners are fluent in English, but some are. But I have a key collaborator for each of those 3 components, for the spiritual formation, the mentoring, and the coaching. And those key collaborators are French people. And we wrote into the founding documents of Elan that the board of directors of Elan always has to consist of half French and half non-French people to maintain the multicultural integrity of the organization from the get-go. So again, what would be more important would be for someone to have their local partners involved in the conversation.
I think there will be people interested in that for sure. Well, this has been great. This has gone a little bit long, but I feel like we could have done even much more on this topic and digging deeper into this. At least I know me personally have a lot of questions for Jen that we'll have to take offline. But thank you, Doug, again for taking time to be with us. You're our first guest, by the way, so we're really excited.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to have had you. And just wanted to remind everybody we are now across multiple platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google. I think there's even some on YouTube. We're not shooting video, so it's just our logo, but it's up there on YouTube podcast. And make sure you follow us on there, that you share, give us a rating. As I say every time, give us an honest rating. We don't need a 5-star if we don't deserve a 5-star. And please leave a comment and any kind of questions you'd have. We would love to interact with you through that. So thank you again for listening to Going.